be available and then will be available on the American Rommeldale YouTube channel. So please share it with everyone that is interested. And of course, we are happy to welcome anyone to join the association if you so choose. We would appreciate your support, but no obligation there. So before I hand this off to Matthew Anderson, who will be presenting today, I just want to go ahead and lay out a few quick ground rules. First, I'm going to have you guys all muted so I can unmute you. If you have questions, Matthew said he is happy to answer them as we go through. So you will be able to either pop in and go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question, or drop it into the chat, and then I will either call on you or we can go ahead and I'll read it out from the chat. So that way we can get all your questions answered as we go through. Of course, try not to interrupt, but just raise your hand or ask those questions in the chat. And I'm sure we will all be respectful and awesome. And I'm happy now to hand this off to Matthew Anderson to introduce himself and teach us all about structure. Matthew?
Thanks, Cody, for inviting me. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You are good to go. And when you need slides changed, just let me know and I'll control that on my end.
All right, good deal. Okay, so like Cody said, my name's Matthew Anderson. I live in the middle of nowhere in Missouri, about halfway between Kansas City and Des Moines. We run, married to my lovely wife, Christy, and with my adult children, Emily and little Andrew, as he's called, run about 100 brood ewe flock of white Lincolns, Rambouillets, fine and medium wooled, natural colored, and then some production-oriented Shropshire sheep. So we show and sell sheep coast to coast and market about 50 head annually through purebred shows and sales, and we have our own online sale in the spring. In addition to the live sheep, we sell, we do some retail lamb market, and then we also sell fleeces, quite a few fleeces across the U.S., and have sold some as far as Alaska and some up into Canada. So we basically have the 4 breeds we have basically don't compete against each other for market share, so they all have their different different group of interested in consumers, if you will. In addition to the livestock showing and selling and breeding sheep, I'm fortunate enough to be asked to judge quite a bit across the U.S. So like this year, I have about 10 shows I'm judging, from California to as far east as Rhode Island. And then I judge the National and Junior Columbia show in Iowa. And then I'm on tap to judge a couple other shows in Maryland and Kentucky this fall. So just to kind of, and then we run, primarily we're a show sheep flock, but we also are production oriented with a Shrop, and then we sell the fleeces off of the wool breed sheep. We're on 80 acres here, fairly steep terrain, so steep enough that it can't be farmed. So when I'm talking about structure, just keep in mind, like basically our sheep, we have like 6 to 7 high tensile cells that we rotate those ewes through, and so it's pretty steep traveling, so they have to have good running gear to be able to motor around back here. And so primarily on fescue, and then a lot of cedar trees that we try and eliminate. So Cody, go to the first slide if you would, please. Okay, so and I'm going at this as far as like someone is a breeder, producer, and then as someone that judges sheep. So basically, with all livestock, fundamentally, I want to analyze them from the ground up, because just like with a house, the bottom part of these sheep, the structure is the foundation of the sheep. So if there's something that's off on the bottom part of the sheep, it's going to basically transmit its way up through the rest of the sheep, and where we get bad pasturings and get sheep that are cow-hocked and sheep that are rough-topped and have a hard time moving around. So Cody, go. Yeah, so let's go back. Let's go to the next slide, and we may go back to the Suffolk one. So the first thing I'm going to look at when evaluating the sheep is basically its pasterns. So think of the pasterns as like basically shock absorbers for sheep. So basically, the sheep aren't going to stand completely straight up and down on their pastern. They'd be a little too straight structured, but they want to have a little bit of flex, um, because those sheep basically have to push off as they're walking. So we want to have a sheep that doesn't have too much set and doesn't have enough set. So on these pictures here, they're showing a sheep that basically, um, as time would go on, that sheep is basically going to get to where it's walking on its dew cloth. So I mean, it's going to basically be in a lot of pain and not going to be a hardy, long term viable type sheep. And I realize we have some of the crowd that's more production oriented or strictly interested just in the conservation, so not necessarily the show ring. And then there's part of the audience that I know shows sheep, and so structure is really important in all aspects. Because structure, basically, if you have poor structured sheep, they're not as hardy, they're not as efficient, they break down earlier. Um, if you sell sheep that are poor structured, you're going to at some point have customers that aren't happy. So basically, everyone in every aspect of the sheep industry needs to, be concerned with structure. And so basically looking at the pastern, like I said, when we first start out, so wanted to make sure that they have a little bit of set, but not too much. And so these pictures show kind of, sheep that are really extreme in their pastern. And so, like I said, on that first picture, as that sheep gets heavier, structure is magnified. So like if you have a 30-day-old lamb or 60-day-old lamb that has a really bad set to its pastern, it's just going to get worse as that sheep gets heavier, because the more weight it puts on, basically it's just going to be pushing those pasterns down. So structure, at our house, is a big cull and highly heritable. So we would never, basically the first thing that I have to check off if we're looking at buying a ram is I'd like to see his mother and father, ideally, see how they are structured, and then what that ram that we're looking at is, because it's a bad footed ram will throw bad footed sheep, and trying to fix those feet and leg issues can take generations to fix to get them back to where you want to be. So I usually start, the sheep that we see typically have more issues on their rear pasterns than their front. And then so on the right hand side of this slide, the knees, basically we want them to go straight down. So we don't want them to be knock-kneed or buck-kneed. And so buck-kneed would be basically if it looks like the sheep is trying to hunch. And so basically, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but like the knock-kneed, as time goes on with that sheep, it's just going to make it worse, and that sheep is going to break down at some point. Um, so let's go to the next slide, Cody, if you would, please. Okay, so I have a sheep here that actually I think still lives at our house, but a very large frame that used probably north of 300 pounds, and so I'm just kind of using this as an example. So if we look at the left-hand picture, that's her rear pasture, and so as you can see, it doesn't go straight down. She has a little bit of set to her hock there, so a little bit of cushion, which is good. And then on her front feet, they basically go straight down, and there's maybe just a little bit of a set. But I wanted to use this picture just to show that that's an extremely large natural colored ewe, that's really sound structured. So, and then as we try and make sheep bigger, structure is usually the first thing that you have to give up in order to get the size. So this sheep, it was not bred by us, but shows that you can have large sheep that are eye appealing, that have balance, that are also structurally correct. And while we have this picture up, so this ewe also, as you can tell, is really good down her top. And if we were to take a tape measure and measure this ewe at the top of her shoulder, so right where her neck and her back meet, and then her hip bone, she would probably be an inch or so taller at the top of her shoulder versus her hip. So, and then and then when we look at this ewe, as we work our way back on her, she also, has some capacity, has some rib, which also ties into structure. But this ewe is really good on her feet and legs, and she's really good down that top line. So these are all things that are applicable in any type of sheep. And I think most people would look at this ewe and probably say she's really, really big. But I also would say, yes, she's really, really big. She's also really good. So let's go to the next slide, Cody. So then here's some other examples. So we'll start left from right. And I tried to pull these off of pictures I've taken, or some sheep that I've been around this last summer. So the first sheep in the picture would be what we would call post-legged. So she doesn't have enough set to her rear hock. Um, and Cody, is there any way you can point or I can point? Excellent. Okay. Yeah. So go right to her hock. Um, so right there. So where Cody is, so when I say she doesn't have enough set to her hock, if we were to draw a line just straight down from that sheep, the back leg should be offset a little bit so that you doesn't have what I would call enough flex. So we would need to push those back legs back just a little bit. Um, so when that ewe, and actually I saw this ewe in person. So post-legged sheep are typically you're going to find in larger breeds, so like Columbia's Rambouillets, like the natural colors that we have. So those sheep typically are going to be a little bit more rounded out of their hip or steeped hip. They're going to maybe be a little bit higher hip than they at the point of their shoulder. And as those sheep try and get out and move, they're actually going to kind of like they're going to scoot. They're not going to be able to take a big stride because they're constricted by that hock. And so as you watch sheep, or actually watch most livestock travel, with the exception of hogs, we always like to say we like things that fill their track. So when a sheep walks in the ring, I'm looking for something that, when it puts its front foot down as it goes to move, I want to see that rear leg almost cover that front track. So it's showing that sheep has a lot of flexibility in its spine and in those back legs. So like with this sheep here, it's going to be a lot more constricted in its movement. And so, an effort to get size and scale on some of these, that ewe is probably an inch or two taller than she is long. And by being shorter bodied, she's going to have a harder time moving around. So, whether or not that would be in a dry lot situation or in a pasture situation like us. So, then in the middle picture here of the black face bucks, um, these rams, especially that one, is really knock kneed. So I would be willing to bet when that lamb was born that those knees almost touch. So as that ram gets bigger, um, those knees, the legs are going to spread apart, but still going to be really knock kneed. So I mean, that ram at maturity is going to not want to breed ewes and isn't going to probably be a very viable breeder because of the leg problem. So I mean, it can't get out and take a big enough stride. And then also that buck, if you go back, Cody, and like circle his back pasterns. So in addition to being knock kneed, he's got quite a bit of set to those rear pasterns. So in addition to probably being hard to travel out on his front end, he's gonna break down as time goes on those back feet as well. And so this ram actually, so this was a pin of rams that I helped broker a deal. And so these rams actually went to a range ram buyer, and the only one out of the pin that this guy didn't want was this buck, basically for the reasons I mentioned, because a ram like that is not going to be a viable breeder because he's going to be in pain and he's not going to want to breed. Um, and then the sheep here to our right, this is a front feet on a sheep. And so, like we talked, like we want those legs to go straight down, and we want to have a little bit of set off those front pasterns. But this was a spring ewe lamb, I believe. So this picture probably would have been taken when this lamb was like 90 days old. And so that sheep already has a really pronounced set to its front hock. And so as time goes on, the those hooves are going to push out, and that dew claw is going to want to touch the ground. Then you can't see it as much from here, but the front hooves are basically splayed, so that sheep's trying to keep itself upright. And so as time goes on, those toes are going to splay more, which isn't ideal. And then those pasterns are going to want to the dew claw and the pasterns are actually going to want to touch the ground. So again, whether or not it's a ram or ewe, it's going to be a sheep that isn't going to long term be viable. And then basically it'll be sorted on structure, regardless of the situation. And I always tell people it's kind of like with dairy cattle. If they can get 3 or 4 lactations out of the cattle, I mean, the milk production isn't what gets them. And Cody can speak to this. It's typically, and Cody's cows don't live on concrete, but the cattle that live on hard surfaces their entire life, the first cull is basically structure. So all of these sheep here, you know, the one that's posty legged on the left would probably have the longest lifespan of these, but the buck in the middle, may not be a viable breeder, and he's going to break down. And then the sheep to the right, you know, if that sheep is going to be shown a lot, it's going to be harder to place well going forward. And then as I'm watching sheep enter the ring, I'm basically watching how the sheep walk. So, I mean, all of these, if I were in a ring and I realized with the Romedales and the natural colors that, the scorecard's 60% on fleece and 40% on conformation, I think that's assuming that they're sound structured. So a lot of these sheep, if they were to come in, aren't going to be in the top third of my class. So especially like the one to the right and then the buck in the middle, it's a pretty easy sort for me just because they're not sound. Can we go to the next slide, Cody? So then the other thing, so in addition to structure, with feet and legs, we're looking for sheep that are balanced, and that comes into how the sheep is put together in its spine. So I like sheep, personally like sheep that are longer necked and really feminine. In my ewes, I like them really feminine. I like rams that are longer necked just because it's visually appealing to me. There's not necessarily any production traits that go along with it. So this ewe lamb that we're looking at on the left, so as we start at the top of her shoulder and we'll work our way down, this sheep's getting progressively deeper bodied as we work our way towards the back of the sheep. And so this is an important trait for wool people, meat breeds people, because basically all of the more expensive cuts in sheep basically are going to be from the back half of the sheep, the hind saddle versus the fore saddle. There's not a ton of demand for neck meat. Neck stew last time I checked. So looking for sheep that get deeper bodied as we work our way back. And so that helps with on rams being able to eat enough forage to be able to get around. Like I know, like on Cody's operation, they finish sheep on grass. The sheep have to have enough capacity and have to have enough rib and guts, so to speak, that they can eat enough feed to maintain what they're doing and that they're growing. So on this ewe lamb here, she'll also have room to carry multiple sheep. So we run into problems when you have sheep Cody has a couple of pictures where basically they're too tubular or cylindrical in their rib shape. And so those, especially in the ewes, they have a hard time carrying more than one lamb. They typically can't eat enough feed once they've lambed to produce enough milk. So again, long term, they're not super viable. So we want sheep that have some um, have some guts to them, and especially in that rear flank. And then as we're looking at the next picture on this ewe, um, she gets wider as we work our way back. So, and that is um, a function of as she works our way back again, the more expensive cuts on those sheep are going to be as we work our way back. Obviously, a sheep like this is going to be easier lambing. And then, we're basically putting more of those expensive cuts and products further back on the sheep. So if you were to look down on them, they're going to get wider both ways. And so like this would be a really well balanced use. And then, she's got a good set to her rear hock. She looks to be a good pasture. And so this would be a sheep, if she were to come in a ring with a judge, isn't going to have any red flags as far as structure or balance. And this looks like a ewe that could go out and have a productive life, possibly be successful in the show ring, but more importantly, be able to go home, lay down, and have some nice lambs. So then we have poor balanced sheep here. So I'm going to start with the ewe on the right. So you can see that ewe has a lot more condition and fat up in the front 1/3 of her body, and then she kind of tapers the wrong way. So she's not going to have as much lacks balance like it says, and then basically is not going to be as maternally productive as the one on the left because she simply there's not as much room there. And so if I were to be lambing out, 50 of each of these ewes, I'd obviously rather have ewes that are a little smaller fronted versus this one that's a little bit bolder in her front. And then the picture with the poor balance, so like some things we've talked about. So that ewe wants to get a little bit ewe-necked, and so Cody, why don't you circle that area? So basically, where her neck comes out of her shoulder, it's too far forward. So she basically naturally wants to hold her head down some more. So in a perfect world, we would push her neck further back up onto her spine. So it's kind of like she wants to lurch when she walks at times. So yeah, so if we were to push her neck upright more, that would make her better. And then the fact that she's holding her head down, if we look at her top line compared to the other one, she basically breaks behind her shoulder and then kind of goes up to a higher hip, and then she rolls out of that hip a little bit. So, not as visually appealing, and then obviously, she's not going to travel as freely as the other U on the left, and like with this U, she's a little bit maybe more posty footed or post legged than we have the one um, that we have on the left. And then on the side view, Cody, go to her rear flank. You can see there's just not as much real estate there. So as far as converting forage into muscle or condition or carrying lambs, she's not going to have as much room as the U on the left. Any questions at this point, anyone? All right, let's go to the next slide, Cody. All right, so then like we talked about on the U being U neck. So again, you can see we're basically, and Cody, kind of show why we call it a U neck. So I mean, it literally looks like a U, is why we call it U neck. So in a perfect world, we would need to basically chop off her neck and then move. We'd need to push her head and her neck back a couple inches. And so when that U walks, she's going to basically have a harder time. She's going to be lurching instead of just going in a normal motion. And so you can see, Cody, point to the top of her shoulder. So you can see where the top of her shoulder is. So ideally, we would move the base of her neck right there, and then that would fix a lot of the issues with the front side of that U. And then the sheep that typically get more U-necked open up in their shoulder blades as well. So like when you handle this U right over the top of her shoulder, you can actually feel the shoulder blades, and so they'll open up more. And so that ties into sheep that basically have too much of condition and whatnot up front, so they would be harder lambing, and then they're obviously not as they don't balance as well, and they don't look as nice. So then when we go over to the picture here on the right, so I would call this U rough topped. So and I believe it's just this U flipped around. So and I realize in the Romedales and in the natural colors, especially if they have some Rambouillet in them, they're gonna break behind their shoulder just a little bit, and they're not gonna be perfect hipped. So like, and I always tell people too, it's like when you think about top lines and sheep, if you take a rope and you pull it as hard as you can from both ends, there's going to be a little bit of sag. So I'm not advocating they have to be perfect topped. I'm just trying to show, ones that are really good and ones that are bad. So this sheep here, so she's weak topped, and so she's probably pinched a little bit in her heart girth. So why don't you circle that too, Cody, real quick? And so basically, if we were to look at that sheep, she's going to be a little more peaked down her top. And so her rib cage is going to be more cylindrical, like we talked about. So she's not going to be able to convert forage as easily, and is going to have a harder time providing for her lambs. And then we go to the hip of this ewe. So she's a little bit higher hipped, and then she really droops from her hooks to her pins. So show the hooks, Cody, and then the pins. So basically, hooks would be their hip bone, and their pin bone is the bones on both sides where Cody was. So that sheep right there is, I don't have to see the bottom half of that sheep is going to be very posty legged just based on the way that it walks. So when this sheep walks, it basically hunches up its back all the time, and so it's not able to take a real large stride. And so when sheep are naturally moving, wool breeds or meat breeds, typically if they're sound, when we're watching them walk around in a show or in a pasture, their spine isn't going to deviate. And by that I mean they're not going to roach their top up, or they're not going to suck it down, so it'll just look kind of effortless. So this sheep, in addition to not being very good topped, is obviously going to have a hard time motoring around a ring, and then going to have a hard time just getting out and traveling. And again, like with hip structure and whatnot, we don't want to make them so square hipped, or square and level, and do what they've basically done to the hog industry, because basically you have in the hogs now, a lot of them, the boars can't service the gilts because basically the parts don't work anymore because they've elevated that tail head up so high. So, there has to be, and especially in the wool sheep, they round out of their hip just a little bit, just because that's not the emphasis isn't on them being perfect hipped. Um, can we go to the Lincoln slide real quick, Cody? I don't know if that's the next one or not. Yeah, keep going. Going. Okay. So on this Lincoln buck that was my son, so you can tell, and Cody circle him from his hip back. So he is not perfect hipped, and so so on the wool sheep, we're not looking for them to be perfect out of their hip because they're a wool sheep. So this is what I would deem acceptable, and he's taller at the point of his shoulder. And as we work our way back on this sheep, he gets progressively wider, and he's not perfect hipped. And Lincolns, long wools or any of them aren't by definition going to be perfect hipped, and that's perfectly fine. So let's go back to the Rambouillet, Cody. Then so back up one. Okay. So then again, just a picture of a Rambouillet ram here. So, and he's probably in that picture was about 350 pounds. So if we start from the ground up, he's really good on his feet and legs. So he's big boned. He has enough set to his hock. And as we look at that ram from the side, he gets wider as we work our way back. Again, he's taller at the point of his shoulder. And being a Rambouillet, he's obviously going to have a more massive neck, and he's a ram, so he should look like, I always say boys need to look like boys, girls need to look like girls. So he's, a little bit shorter necked, has a little bit more massive neck, but, it comes out right at the top of his shoulder. And we work our way back on this sheep. He's really good down his top line for a sheep that large. He's good hipped, and able to motor around the pasture and whatnot with ease. And like he is, he's going on 3.5 years or 4 years old, and doesn't, he's still really good on his feet and legs. So if you start with a good foundation, these, I don't know how long he'll live, but 4 years for a ram of his size is pretty good. And then another thing I wanted to bring up on rams and structure. So of the 50 or head so that we sell a year, we are very, very selective on the rams that we keep because of structure. So, with 100 head brood ewe flocks, so just say everyone only has singles. So half of them are going to be rams, half are going to be ewes. So of those 50 rams, there might be in any given year one or two that we would potentially keep back either for ourselves to replace a sire or to sell. And it depends on the year. But I think a lot of people sometimes, we only want to keep the best bucks, and we only want to sell rams that will proliferate and make, good sheep for other people. So there might be times when it's tempting to want to sell a ton of rams, but at the end of the day, we want to sell as high end, as high quality sheep as we can. And so sometimes there might be some rams that could go into a flock, but we may sale barn them versus keeping them. And I know, or selling them as stud rams. And I know some of the breed associations actually charge more to register rams versus ewes, which I think it should be, because basically the ram, they always say, is half of your flock. It's really more than that, because you're gonna have those daughters for years. So in addition to what that ram sired, you're gonna have his offspring. They'll be your next breeding piece. So we definitely want to make sure that we're dealing with um, high quality, high structured sheep to begin with. You want to go to the next slide, sir? Okay, so these are these are some sheep that were shown at a large show a couple weeks ago. So we'll start with the wool sheep, and so we'll just kind of pick it apart. I've tried to obscure the people, so they're not known. So this wool sheep here has a lot of problems right out the gate. So the first thing that hits me if I'm watching this sheep walk towards me is he's already got pretty good set to those front hocks. And Cody, circle his front knees, so you can tell that ram, it's not straight up and down. He's trying to compensate for those toes going out, and so his knees going out too. So basically, he can't get comfortable on that front half of his skeleton. So again, that's going to make him a harder breeder because he's going to be in pain and he's constricted. So, and then as we go up to the top of his shoulder, Cody circled that for us. And again, this is a wool breed ram, so I'm not expecting them to be perfect topped. So this ram right there is, he's kind of higher in his chine, if you will, but then he breaks really bad over his rack, so like, and that isn't something that's going to get better with time. It's just going to become more pronounced. And so basically he's not constructed well enough in his front 1/3 of his body to begin with. So then he breaks behind his shoulder. He's probably pinched in his heart girth all the way around. So we would need to give him more base width and give him a bigger rib cage. So as we work our way down that ram's top, also appears to be a little bit shorter from flank to flank, and then he's high in his hip right there. And again, we can take a little bit of curvature from their hip, but that's getting really high. So then if we go down to his bottom, go back to his rear feet, you can see basically his rear pasterns are mimicking the front ones. So basically all of it, basically his entire body is wanting to lean backwards because of his structure. And so that ram's, being set up for a picture. And so that ram, his comfortable stance is basically standing underneath of himself. So in a perfect world, and Cody circled a little triangle between the blue and his leg. Like his leg would be completely perpendicular with the or go to the left real quick. Other left. No, so yeah, so right back. So the space right where Cody's cursor is, there wouldn't be any daylight there in a perfect world. His leg would be perpendicular, but that's how that ram stands naturally, and that's comfortable to him. So when that ram walks, he's gonna push up that hip, and he's gonna kind of scoot because that's the only way he can comfortably get out and move, and he's gonna want to put his head down. So I mean, just not a real good structured ram. So then the U over here to the right, kind of the same thing. They've done a better job hiding her front pasterns, but she's not necessarily buck-kneed, but she's kind of getting to that point. This is a larger breed of sheep, um, and so this U, go up to the top of her hip, Cody. So we can see this breed. They want them to be really good hip. So this sheep, obviously you can tell has a curve, and so we can tell that, and we could tell that if we cut off the top half of the screen, because she does not have enough set to her rear hock, so she's very posty legged as well. And then she also has some set to her rear hock, so she's not able to get out and take a real long stride when she gets out and moves. And then it's also indicative of, basically we can see in this picture, um, right by the banner, she's basically pushing her spine up because she's got to make room to get out and move. And so the only way she can do that comfortably is basically to, we call it roaching their tops. And so she basically doesn't have enough flexibility from her 13th rib back. So if we were to fix this sheep, we'd need to make her longer bodied and then make her longer hipped, to make her be able comfortable to where she could get out and move. And then, just to be clear, like a sheep like this probably is not run in a commercial or grass type setting, but I just wanted to show some of the extremes. Does anyone have any questions on these? All right, we can go to the next one if you want, Cody. Okay, so then have two wool breeds that my family raised. So we've already looked at the Lincoln Ram, but he percentages out nicely. He's taller at the point of his shoulder. He's good on his feet and legs. We can see that his pasterns, he doesn't really have that much of a set to his pasterns, and like we talked about before, he's rolls out of his hip a little bit. And we also noticed, when we had Shrops that were more show ring oriented, they really wanted them super straight down their top, and the more you raise up that tail head, the more issues you're going to have basically with lambing. So having a little bit of a curvature there makes lambing a lot easier versus ones of their tail heads. If that line went straight out, you have ewes that have a harder time working those lambs up and actually having them. So when we went to more production oriented Shrops, they're a little bit rounder out of their hip. Really haven't had to assist with a lot of lambing issues, whereas before we'd have some that would basically get stuck, so we can sleep easier. Then the natural colored ewe here on the right, Again, and she's been trimmed, so I mean a little bit is this is she's not slick sheared certainly, but basically as we look down on the top of this ewe, she's really feminine about that front end. You can tell she's really long necked, and if we work our way back, she gets progressively wider. And if we had I didn't give Cody a profile shot on this ewe, but if we were to look at her from her brisket and then working our way back, she gets deeper bodied as we work our way back. So again, that lends itself to being able to live on grass and then being able to produce, being able to carry, one or two or three lambs. Let's go to the next one, Cody. And then again, another large framed ewe. This was a fine wool ewe that my daughter had. So we'll this ewe here, we'll pick her apart just a little bit. So in a perfect world, at Cody's point, you circle at the top of her shoulder, maybe push her head just back a little bit. So that ewe right there, it's basically a comfortable stance. So, in an ideal world, would push her neck back just a little bit. But a ewe, this was a yearling ewe. But again, as we look at her, she gets wider as we work our way back. She's really straight down that top line, and then when we get to her hip, obviously rounds out just a little bit, so for ease of lambing. Um, and like we talked about in the other good structured sheep, if we go down to her rear legs, she's got some set to her hock, so she can get out and move around the ring. She has a little bit of set to her pasterns, which I mean that's perfectly acceptable. She was a very successful show ewe for my daughter. So, but that ewe is going to be able to get out and forage on grass and be able to move around and not be in pain. And then if we go to her front legs, basically she goes straight down. She's not buck kneed in any way on some of the other ones that we've looked at. Has just a little bit of set on those front wheels, and then if we look at the side profile, that looks like a capacious type ewe that could go out, eat forage, earn her keep on forage, and then go out and be able to raise lambs. And I realize we have lots of probably half the audience is running sheep on grass, and like our ewes typically about 8 months out of the year, depending on if we get rain, basically live on grass. So it's important for them to have enough internal capacity to be able to eat enough feedstuffs to keep maintain their condition, be able to breed, have lambs, and obviously we supplement once they've lambed. But then after we wean them, they basically get dried up in a dry lot and then get kicked back out on grass. And then they basically need to recover and be able to do that on grass versus in some of the club lamb operations, they're all dry lotted and fed a lot of concentrates. We're trying to minimize costs. So is that we have more slides, Cody? Yeah. So questions, comments, concerns. There must be some. Don't be timid.
I don't have any in the chat.
Did you have any other things we should go over, Cody, as it relates to structure?
I
You
think those
want
were
to?
the main topics that I was looking for, but does anyone have questions on structure or things that they're curious about or would like to know? We have a few more minutes before we're, at our time limit for Zoom. So,
Oh, and then Cody, go back to the last slide, the black U.
okay, one second. This
Okay,
one?
so then like with this ewe, if we were to slick shear this sheep, she would look about the same. So obviously she's got about 2 inches of fleece on her, like with what they want for natural colored wool sheep. But if you start with a good sheep, trimming them and presenting them is always easier than one. If she broke behind her shoulder, we'd have to stack a bunch of wool there right behind her shoulder. So it's always easier when you start with a better sheep, structure and otherwise. So if we were to take all of her wool off, she'd look very similar to that. So if you start with a good foundation, it makes everything easier going forward.
Oops. All right. Billy says, thank you. Great. And Becca Hartman says, thank you, Matt.
Wonderful.
And we got some thumbs up. Oh, okay. Jason asked, can you talk a little about angle of the shoulder blade?
Okay, yes. So and this is more of a club lamb thing that I believe they borrowed from the hog people. So they basically want to make these sheep, and Cody kind of circle the shoulder blade area. So they basically have wanted to shorten up their shoulder blade and then go down to a brisket. So they're basically wanting to shorten that up to basically make the sheep um, better fronted. It's like this ewe is a good, with she's up fronted, but in an effort to make them where they're wedge shaped and they look like they get progressively wider, they've tried to make that shoulder blade shorter. And so, in doing so with some sheep, they make it so short that those sheep don't have as much flexibility out of the front of their spine because we've shortened that bone up. And so, basically, they have to put their heads down when they get out and walk. And so, actually, I judged a county fair here a couple weeks ago. The sheep were really cool looking on the side profile, and then when the kids let those sheep get out and walk, they were so they were shorter in their shoulder blade. Those sheep basically had to walk with their heads basically even with their top line. So I mean, they could not hold their head up high enough. So it's kind of like letting the sheep kind of like I mean almost like a hog. So their neck, what's comfortable for them is extremely low.
And someone Susan says that she hopes some of the youth have been able to watch this. And I know that there are a bunch of 4-H groups that are using these once we put them on YouTube. So go to
Oh,
the
and then the shoulder blade too. The angle also depends on if it gets too far out. Those sheep will want to get basically what kind of bulldog fronted, where they'll throw their front legs out. So if you're watching them walk, it almost looks like they waddle. And if you pull that shoulder blade too far back, they walk like they're walking on their tippy toes. So basically, you want to have like this sheep would have an appropriate angle to her shoulder blade, and that would be a big sort for us at home when they're lambs. If there's something that's not quite right, if they're too straight in their shoulder or something, that's something that would get taken. We'd take to town.
Thank you. John is wondering how concerned would you be with a ewe that is a little cowhocked?
It's gonna be more critiqued in the show ring world, and so actually, I guess we didn't have that picture. So when a sheep's cowhocked, so go back to a rear hocks, Cody, and circle on this, yeah, just on this blackie would be fine.
Yeah.
So when they're cow hawked, basically at the hawk, they turn in, or sometimes they'll almost touch. And the bigger the sheep get, typically the bigger the offense is. They haven't made a perfect sheep yet, so I mean, there's a lot of sheep that win shows that Jason and Cody can attest to that are cow hawk that win large shows that maybe shouldn't. Um, so if you were just on a conservation or fiber type thing, it's not going to be critiqued as heavily. Some sheep, as they get older, may turn out just a little bit. So I mean, it's not a it's kind of basically depending on what your market will bear and what you want. So, I mean, we try and find sheep that, as they're walking to you and away from you, basically are symmetrical. So, basically, they're not pushing those hocks out, and um, they don't have them in. And so, if you have a sheep that gets really cow hocked, and go to her hip, Cody. So, the sheep that are super super cow hocked basically they'll get really high hipped because that hip doesn't have anywhere to go in its spine. So you have basically you're twisting those legs, and so that hip has to go somewhere, so it gets pushed up. Actually, go back a couple. Go to that the wool sheep one, Cody, the in the Suffolk slide. Yeah, that okay. So circle that. So that sheep, in addition to being not real good off its back wheels, probably cowhawks, and I can tell that just by that right there. If I were to just cut off its legs, so that spine can never stay straight because those back legs have to have. There has to be some give somewhere, since that sheep isn't the best structured. So, if we're starting from the ground up, the pasterns are a little soft, and it's probably cowhocked. And as we work our way up, that sheep gets a little bit higher hip, so it kind of multiplies as we work our way up. But on being a little cowhocked, I mean it's not a deal breaker. Um, and so I realized too, if you go to like the Shetland standard, they actually don't discriminate against cowhawk at all. And then the sheep aren't knock-kneed, but it says in the standard that basically their front legs should almost at the point of their knees should touch and go straight down. So that would be contrary from what a lot of the um, show ring and other breed standards would be. That answer your question, John?
I think so. All right. Are there any other questions? He says, thank you. All
And I
right.
guess, and then I would be, if I had to pick, cowhog ram, a slightly cowhog ram or ewe, I would take the ewe just because the ram's going to have a bigger effect on your flock. But like if you use a ram and you get 20 lambs out of them and every single one of them's cowhog, probably not going to stay here forever. And then as you watch those sheep, like I said, walk around, their sheep, their front legs and their back legs should be in strides. Like you shouldn't be able to, their hock shouldn't be pushed out or underneath. I mean, you should be able to. They should just kind of fall. They should just flow.
And someone on the iPhone says that they want to go scrutinize their sheep now, which seems like a good idea. What we're all hoping for.
Yes, do it when you've had a bad day at work because you're always more critical. It's always a good time to call when you're mad. Just get the red chalk out and just go nuts. And then if you have a flock too, Cody, I guess if you have, and this might be more for fiber flocks, structure. You're not going to live or die by structure, but maybe next year, like, okay, we're going to pick a ram that's better hipped. Because I guess my biggest critique on some of the smaller wool breeds would be is they want to get higher hipped, like that wool ram that we looked at, and then that in turn makes them want to be cowhawk, and then on some of them wants to make them get lower on those pasterns. So basically, trying to make those sheep a little bit smoother down their top line. So I get my biggest critique for most of the wool breeds would be from their hips back. So finding sheep that are long, long body, especially long from that last rib back, and then trying to elevate those tail heads just a little bit, and by doing that, we'll get a little bit better structure at the end result.
Fantastic. All right. And we'll go see if there's any last questions. And otherwise, we are almost at our hour. I think no one's typing. So, all right. Thank you, Matthew. Do you have any last thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, like the iPhone user said, it's always good to scrutinize your sheep. Oh, I guess I'll tell a quick little story. So I would be known in show ring circles as I like bigger sheep. I like ones that are a little more extreme in their front end, just because that just floats my boat. There's other people that want sheep that are more moderate in their frame, and I always say it takes more skill to make a larger good sheep than just an average sheep. And then all of us with wool sheep, you have size, structure, and then also fleece quality. We want fleeces that are uniform all the way back. But I will typically, when we get ready to wean, excuse me, I will have some other sheep breeders come by, and basically they don't know what ram they're out of. They don't know what use. Basically, throw all the lambs in a pen and basically have them rip them apart. And so it doesn't hurt my feeling, but it's always good to get someone like this that will be brutally honest with you as far as a critique. Like, I really really like these sheep with these parts, and then like I really really don't like them in this part, or like that buck lamb's too straight in his front end to keep. So it's always good to have other people look at your sheep with you in a nice way. So I've known a lot of these people for a long time, so they sometimes look at me and be like, "Really?" And I'll do the same for them. But it's always good to get other sets of eyes on your sheep. So the more I invite people that I know don't like exactly my kind of sheep, like, come look through these sheep, tell me what you see, because maybe I'll learn something. So you can't be afraid. The way to learn is having other people look at your sheep, and then basically kind of cuss and discuss what they see, because you see them every day. So everyone, even if they don't want to admit it, suffers from a little bit of barn blindness. So it's always good to get a couple different sets of eyes on the sheep. And that's the way, if you're trying to make the sheep better, like if someone comes through your flock and goes, wow, these are all really cowhocked or really soft pastured, maybe you need to think about getting a ram that's really, really good in, in this one part. And then I guess closing part would be like, when I'm looking for a ram, obviously it needs to be structurally correct, but then I'm looking for what my flock needs, not what I have, because a lot of people will make the mistake of they'll go buy a ram that looks just like what they have, but that's not going to fix your fault. So like if you want a ram, if your sheep are a little bit easier down their top and steeper hip than they want, you need to go find a ram that's structurally correct, but then the next thing needs to be, he needs to be really good down his top line. And so there's going to be give and take. Maybe he's going to throw coarser fleeces or less dense, but you need to, no ram's going to fix all of your problems. So you basically have to do it by pieces. And then if you get the better top lines, but you had to give up a little bit of fleece quality, then you get a ram and you breed those daughters to something that's maybe a little more dense or a little bit, finer fleece. So it's a never ending game that's maddening and I love it.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Matthew. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you haven't registered for the future webinars, please do. The next one will be on flock management, and then we will be moving in. That'll be our August one. September, the Romadel Association will be having Dr. Lisa Serber here to discuss managing fine wool sheep from nutrition as well as daily management for wool quality. And then we will end in October this series with a panel discussion on how different farms sell and market their sheep. So I hope you guys have found this useful. Please watch for it to be sent out to you via email, the recording tomorrow, and then it'll be available on YouTube as well as posted to Facebook. And feel free to share it widely. That way, more people can enjoy it. And thank you all for coming. And I hope this was helpful and useful. And we'll see you back here later. And
Well, they're gonna post a link.